Certainly since the fall of the Roman Empire, the once and future king of Europe is Germany. Let's face it. Germany has the population, the human capital, the scientific industrial base. It has everything to be a great power. Since the end of the Second World War, as a consequence of this disastrous defeat, I think Germany has been psychologically crippled and, of course, subjected to a lot of re-education designed to convince the Germans that they should be on an apology tour in perpetuity for eternity. That's got to end. There has to be a more balanced perspective. The rest of Europe is watching, and the same questions are being asked all over Europe. And you're right. I think we're going to see nationalist parties come to power, and they are not far right. Anybody who calls any of these people far right doesn't know what the words mean. I mean, it's a joke. These people are all remarkably moderate. They are not far right by any stretch of the imagination. But this is the power that the left has exerted as a result of the post-war re-education and the emergence of this post-war elite that has been so self-destructive. The French usually lead these things. You know, the old expression was, if Paris gets a cold, or if Paris sneezes, then the rest of Europe gets a cold. I still think that the French are quite capable of overthrowing their government and starting over. They need to. I'm a great admirer of the French and French civilization. They too need to make the decision to survive. And then, of course, there's Britain, which is on the verge of collapse. It's a catastrophe. I don't know what will happen there. Germany's role historically in Europe, certainly until the Second World War, was not negative. It was not destructive. It was on the whole very positive. And I think they have to revert to that. I don't think Germany was evil in World War I, nor do I think they were responsible for it. So I think there's, this is the problem. The Germans themselves are the problem. They have to make a decision. What are we going to be? Are we going to be Germans? Are we going to liquidate ourselves? Are we going to continue to commit national suicide by swamping our population with foreigners? Are we going to preserve our country, our culture, our history, who we are? That's the question the Germans have to answer. I think they're going to answer in the affirmative, yes. Not yet, but it's coming. Now, there are elections on the 23rd of February. I'll be very interested to see how they turn out. But at some point in the future, if things go the way they should, I think many Germans will look back on Scholz and his predecessor back to Merkel and see these people as treasonous that did everything in their power to destroy the country. They've got to rebuild Germany back to something good, which is what it was originally, and set aside this apology tour. So that's number one. So Europe can come roaring back, and I think it will, but it's not going to be, it won't look as it has in the past. You may end up with different security arrangements. It may be that the Spaniards, French, and Italians organize themselves along with the Portuguese in one way. It may be the Germans, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Austria, maybe the Czech Republic, it depends, will organize themselves differently, maybe with Hungary. You also have this, Central European conglomerate, roughly what you had in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire with these countries coalescing into some arrangement. So I don't share the view that somehow or another we Americans have to be there forever to prevent you from killing each other. I don't. I think we need to go. And I think that the Europeans need to be their own first responders. And I thought in January of 2022, I was interviewed by Dimitri Simes at the American Interest in Washington. And I predicted that if, I said, first of all, the Russians are going to go into eastern Ukraine. Everybody else thought I was wrong. Oh, no, they'll never do that. I said, absolutely, they're going to do it. And then I said that if NATO engages in this and essentially tries to run a proxy war or a war, they will lose and NATO will eventually fold and go away. I think NATO is on the path to extinction. I just don't see wars breaking out in Europe right now. It's not impossible, but I don't see it happening. There is some unfinished business. If you spend any time in Europe, you know anything about Hungary, you know what happened to it in the two world wars. You look at Romania, you look at Slovakia, look at other areas. The Hungarians have some unfinished business. There's no doubt about it. But, on the whole, I don't see any wars occurring. I think that you've got a group of able people who can contain those passions and channel them into productive outcomes.
And I think Lavrov was trying to make a point. And the thing we have to understand now, and I'm sure President Trump grasped much of this, there's no trust between them and us. That's been completely destroyed. This insistence on this false narrative about Russia's criminality, Russia's responsibility for what happened, Russia's atrocities, all this nonsense, that's not going to be forgotten quickly. Not just by the government. People here in the United States don't understand. The entire Russian population remains enraged. And just because we step forward and say, look, this was wrong. And, you know, from the very beginning, I kept urging publicly, because I have no way to address the president directly, stand there and tell everybody, this is not my war. I didn't start it. I don't want it. And I'm going to end it and let it go. He's finally gotten there now, and he's beginning to say those things. That's going to help enormously, but he can't undo the damage quickly. And we're not going to get a shake and bake plan for immediate cessation of all hostilities. It's going to take time. And we have to understand that Russia has won this war. We have to be very careful about what we demand at all. In fact, I would argue we shouldn't demand a damn thing. What we should urge is let's come up with a new security architecture. Let's bury this thing finally and irrevocably and move forward. And I think that's what President Trump wants to do. I just hope that the people working for him get it. Well, I greeted that with a tremendous sigh of relief and also a certain amount of admiration for President Trump, because President Trump, when shown the truth, recognized it finally. And I don't know why it took as long as it did, but I'm glad that it reached him. And he's now telling everyone what you, I, and a lot of other people have been saying for 3 years. And this is the first dramatic step in the direction of normalizing relations with Russia, for which he deserves enormous applause and gratitude from us. Well, I don't think it's very difficult to play Biden like a fiddle, let's be frank. I think a lot of people fiddled with Biden for 4 years. And the people most mightily responsible for the big lies and the terrible, terrible things we've done to the people of Ukraine, as well as to the Russians. I mean, we're mightily responsible for over 1 million Ukrainian deaths and almost 100,000 Russian deaths. And it's a good thing. It's also a courageous thing that he stood up and said it. But Zelensky is a criminal, and I think that's begun to sink in. And perhaps Elon Musk and his friends can do to Zelensky and this terrible government in Ukraine what they've done here. We might as well expose this entire fraud. When McFarlane, I think it was McFarlane that I may have his name wrong, who was ambassador in Moscow under Obama, when he arrived, President Putin leaned over and said to him privately in the ear, "You don't listen. We need to listen. We need to listen more than we speak right now." This is not because we're being humiliated. That has nothing to do with it. Acknowledging the truth is not a humiliation. It's a liberation. Right. And that's the way Trump looks at it. And I'm sure he does. And he's right. This is not about winning anything. If we're going to win something, let's win the fight for a better world where the truth prevails and war is scarce. The sanctions need to be lifted completely. He wants to normalize relations with Moscow. He needs to make that abundantly clear to Secretary Rubio, because this is a very unnecessary and insulting remark, as though, first of all, we've had any effect, and we haven't. If anything, you and I know Russia is stronger and more capable today than it was 4 years ago, and much of that is due to us and our stupidity. Not that I object to a strong Russia. You and I never have. We see that as a positive thing on the world stage. It's not a negative thing. But Rubio, I don't think is completely on board yet. Now, I don't know about Steve Witkoff. He strikes me as being someone who's a little more savvy, and he has the president's trust and confidence. It's been my experience that when you listen to the people in the room speaking, I'm talking about the Americans, the one man who says almost nothing is usually the smartest, and that's Witkoff.
So I think if we're not careful, we could be at war in March. It's not just Israel versus most of the region potentially, and they won't all come in at once, but they all eventually will come in. And we are not prepared for that. I don't think we understand the ramifications And I don't think we can bully or bomb everybody into submission. Those days are over. And of course, you can't view any of this in isolation from BRICS. Everyone's tired of us bullying them financially. And this leads on to discussions of de-dollarization. And that process is not going to happen immediately. Current events have certainly accelerated it. People are looking for ways to avoid us, to avoid the SWIFT system, avoid the large financial institutions. And, you don't build those institutions overnight. They've been with us now since the end of the Second War, practically. But you can build them. And the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, and others are all, Brazil, they're all involved in this. None of this really bodes well for us. And we are behaving, forgive the analogy, as a reaction, like a reactionary Austria-Hungary in 1848. In other words, instead of recognizing that things are changing and adapting, our first impulse is to beat down any evidence for real change. And I think that's a mistake, but I think that's where we are. Now, that's the Middle East. And of course, that's also inextricably intertwined with oil, as you know. And then there are these talks in the United States, we're going to reinvigorate the oil industry. But as a European, anybody educated man knows that takes years. We have punished anyone who wanted to drill, who wanted to refine. There's this obsession with carbon. It's true in Germany. The Germans have done it. We've done it. So it'll be a long time before you can get a lot of things online. And these oil companies are looking for investment. They're not going to do it on their own. They want some sort of signal from the United States government that they're not going to be punished for what they do. So in the past, it wasn't deemed, what's the right word, affordable. There was no financial reward to it, wasn't economical. Well, I think that's going to change. And again, I know the Egyptians, the Turks, others need coal, different kinds of coal for their purposes. So there's a lot that can be done now. And I hope that we will back down from a lot of these tariffs, this whole attitude of punishment and bullying, because if we can get past that, I think we can do a lot of business, very, very, very good business with the world because of the resources we have. But I do think we're going to see a big explosion in oil. I think we're going to see an explosion in coal, especially the export markets from the United States. Everybody desperately needs coal. I'm talking now to Germans who want to import coal to Germany. Inconceivable. But that's what they want. And they're talking about 1 million tons on hand at every plant. Well, we can do it. But again, our coal industry is lagging. We need some investment in the coal industry to get these mines back up to full speed. We have the rail, we have the infrastructure, we have a lot of people that know what they're doing, but it takes investment. Haven't seen it, And then when you go into things like rare earths, if we're going to be isolated from the rest of the world because of our behavior, we're going to have to find it on our own. And what we have discovered in the coal fields, particularly in southern Kentucky, is that the seams of the coal have a lot of rare earths in them. And you have some of these mines that have been mined for over 100 years, huge slag heaps, huge containment pools. Guess what? They're full of rare earths. And at some point, we're going to run ourselves into the ground. We're headed for a financial crisis. Whether you talk to Michael Faber, or you talk to Alistair MacLeod, or James Grant, or Luke Groman, or any number of people, they all know this. Nassim Taleb is one of my favorites. He's been saying, Armageddon is just over the hill. I think he's right. That's going to change everything because we can't afford this nonsense. And we have real problems in the United States. We are not a cohesive society anymore. We have problems with the rule of law. Our borders have been open. We have millions of people in the country we don't want and don't need. And I don't know how we're going to resolve it, but it's going to be resolved. It may not be particularly attractive the way we do it, but if we don't, we won't have a country. You still have this Washingtonian class that's hijacked our foreign and defense policy, and they want to perpetuate this conflict. That's what President Trump is up against in his administration. People that see value in it for their own purposes. And of course, it helps to justify this unending stream of income for the Department of Defense, which is outrageous. We have almost $1 trillion defense budget, and these warmongers, as you call them, are talking about adding $200 billion more this year. Well, that's ridiculous. The only people talking about war in Asia are Americans. We seem to be interested in cultivating tension and finding reasons to spend excessively on defense to counter enemies and forces that, quite frankly, aren't aimed at us at all. I think you have a similar situation in the Middle East right now. Were it not for Israel's decision to move beyond simply responding to the 7 October attack, although now we're seeing a lot of information that suggests the Israelis knew it was coming and allowed that attack to happen anyway, sadly. They turned this into a war for Jewish supremacy in the region, a war to expand the country and essentially subjugate its neighbors. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. You have a similar situation in Ukraine. We built Ukraine up with the help of Europeans. We developed a large Ukrainian military establishment, trained it, equipped it, aimed it at Russia, and we're preparing to launch it. And we had all of these biolabs engaged in very, very dangerous research with a bioweapon orientation towards the Russians. And then on top of that, you had people that saw this as an opportunity to, quote unquote, harm Russia economically as well as socially. I think we have to, if we're going to discuss that, we have to include the United States, because in the absence of the United States right now, and I would add Israel, you take those two out, there's almost no one out there interested in going to war with anybody. I mean, no one in Asia wants to fight anyone. Whenever you go to a conference, I talk to friends in Singapore, talk to friends that are in Hong Kong, also Korea, Seoul, they all say the same thing. And so none of these things would have happened without us. I don't think you would have had any problem at all had we not decided to do what we did in 2014 with the Maidan coup and then subsequently. So when you say, how close are we to disaster, you have to ask is how close is the United States to disaster? And then if you look at it militarily, the idea of waging war against China is quite conceivably the dumbest idea in the history of mankind. There's an old expression, a ship is a fool to fight a port or fight a fort. China is the largest fort in the world. What are you going to do to it? Lob missiles and rocks at it? It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. And you're going to do all this from the sea because Taiwan is 6,000 miles from us. That means you have to sustain logistically everything you do. And today, everything from Japan all the way to Australia that is involved with the logistical support for our air and naval forces can be targeted by the Chinese and destroyed with precision guided missiles. So the war has changed. The world has changed. The whole idea is crazy. And I think President Trump knows that. And I think President Trump's already made it clear that that's not a place he wants to go. He wants to do business with the Chinese, but he wants it to occur on an equitable basis. In other words, if it's mutually beneficial. And most of our problems with the Chinese could be secured or could be solved by securing our borders. You don't like what they're bringing into the country, kick them out, throw them out. The Chinese throw Japanese and other foreigners out of their country all the time. We could throw thousands of Chinese out of our country for stealing not just IP, being mules carrying cash for drug cartels. I mean, come on, let's get real. You don't go to war with another nation state, with one of the world's oldest civilizations, because you don't like what they're doing today in your country. So let's fix what we got as a problem here at home. Let's not go to war. I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. First of all, Taiwan is not under immediate threat. That has been grossly exaggerated out of all proportion to reality. If you look a couple of years ago and you read specifically what President Xi has said, he was talking about peaceful unification on or about 2040. That was his forecast. And I still think that that's likely. It could happen sooner. We also don't understand Taiwan. Taiwan is split. You've got the old Kuomintang party under Chiang Kai-shek. Well, that party is pro-Beijing. They want unification. They want to become part of China because they know China has changed. China is not a communist country. And we get confused because we don't understand that both the Chinese on the mainland and the Chinese on Taiwan aspire to the same sort of social structure. That social structure is on display. It's called Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew's formula is what both of them would follow. And then you have another large party, and you have a president from this party right now, though this party doesn't control the parliament, that is historically pro-Japanese, is now pro-American, and wants independence. It's not going to happen. The Taiwanese parliament will never go along with it because they know that's immediate war with mainland China. They don't want it. You got to understand the banking systems are interconnected. Capital flows from Taiwan into China and back out to Taiwan. So I don't see it. So I think we're on at least a promising path right now with Ukraine. Could we still screw it up? Of course. If we go over there and try to beat our chests and act as though we're in charge, we'll fail because we're not. We have no leverage over the Russians in Europe at all now. They hold all the cards, and they've won this war unambiguously, and they have the force. We do not. Our army is pitiful. It's a shadow of its former self. It's not trained well. It's not ready to fight anybody in most cases. We need to get it out, bring it home, and build a new army, not rebuild it. I think that's true for a lot of the Europeans as well. The Russians are in a very strong position. So what we ought to seek is something they've mentioned, which is a new security architecture in Europe. And that would allow us to dramatically reduce our footprint over there, which is something President Trump wants, to change how we interact and to become more transparent on all sides and permanently put these hostilities behind us because there's no reason for them. You know, Russia is not our sworn enemy. We are not Russia's sworn enemy. This is all artificial, created by a small minority of people in Washington who hijacked the government. This is a man who does not want war, but not wanting war is not enough. You have to pursue courses of action that are designed to avoid war. Now, I think he's coming around right now to that in Ukraine. I listened to remarks by the new Secretary of Defense, and I would give him out of the four remarks, one was another rehash of what we heard from Biden, but the other three were very encouraging. And he simply said, you know, the map is going to change. The Russians are not going to retreat from Ukraine. That's a fact of life. Ukraine is going to be neutral. That's good. It's a fact of life. NATO has no role in Ukraine. Good. U.S. forces will not be in Ukraine. Good. I wish he'd get them out right now. Now, when we go to the Middle East, that same minority has hijacked things and is driving us into confrontation with everybody in the region. I think our position in the Middle East is maybe not permanently destroyed, but destroyed for decades. I don't know how we recover from that, but he's got to come up with a way to avoid conflict. This Gaza business is inflammatory. It's enraged hundreds of millions of Muslims. It's off the rails, has to be discarded. Everyone has said the same thing. If you won't consider another Palestinian state, we're out. You know, either you put up or shut up. I don't think we can bully or beat them into submission. And what I think we're doing unconsciously is challenging everyone to fight us. Because let's be frank, if you separate us from Israel, they're not afraid of Israel. They're afraid of us. So we have to determine how far do we want to go. And historically, we have always set limits to how far we were willing to go with Israel. This time we seem to have breached all limits, seem to be ready to underwrite unconditionally anything. I think that's very dangerous. I don't think it's necessary. In addition to that, he released all of these 2,000-pound bombs that we had previously said we weren't going to provide to the Israelis under Biden. All of that's very ominous because, frankly, with those kinds of munitions, you could erase Gaza within the space of a few days. But I think if that were to happen, that's where I think the rest of the region is likely to erupt. You have Jordan that has already said, if you try to force all these refugees on us, we will declare war. The Egyptians have said absolutely not, and they have moved their army into the Sinai. Are we going to assist the Israelis against the Egyptian army and Egypt itself? I don't know. And King Abdullah is in a terrible position. He's very weak. His state is not capable of withstanding too much stress. They have 11.2 million Palestinians living in Jordan, far more than we normally admit to. Very dangerous. We just shipped large numbers or whatever remaining heavy bombs to Israel. These are these things they call the mother of all bombs. You've seen pictures of it. It delivers the equivalent of a 10-kiloton warhead. Now, I don't know how the Israelis plan to deliver it. we have great difficulty delivering. It's just so huge, so heavy. And if you're going to try and fly through integrated air defenses, which is the case with Iran, you risk being shot down with that thing. I don't know. Perhaps they plan on using it against Gaza because the president has now also said that the West Bank is also going to be annexed by Israel. So presumably that is also going to be subject to a campaign of mass murder, expulsion, and ethnic cleansing, as Gaza has been. And then you have Syria, which is still in turmoil, but could become a highway for the Turkish army. And that's, of course, a nightmare on steroids if you're an Israeli right now. And then there's Iran. Will the Israelis still insist on war with Iran? Now, we've said we won't participate or join in it. But I wouldn't put it past Mr. Netanyahu to find a way to provoke a conflict with Iran, even if it requires a false flag to get us into the fight. We saw these false flags. They were organized by MI6 in Syria when the Syrians were accused of using chemical weapons against their own people. It was all nonsense. It never happened. We launched cruise missiles, you'll remember, twice, all false flag. So we're capable of doing stupid things without seriously examining what's actually going on down there. And I wouldn't put it past the president. The president is emotional, and he can be very impulsive. You also have the Russians, and they're much more likely to intervene in a conflict on the side of Iran to persuade us to back out, to stay out. That would be their goal. The Russians don't want to fight us, neither do the Chinese. But if they're compelled, they might intervene to demonstrate their ability to harm us, if for no other reason, just say, stay out of this. And I think we should wise up because a lot of our equipment and materiel has not performed well in Ukraine. And I think all the assertions of Russian weakness have turned out to be utterly false. So I would not provoke the Russians if I were in the White House. I don't think President Trump wants to. But there are forces in motion now that are going to be hard to contain. And I don't know how much influence the president's able to exert to contain them, particularly with Mr. Netanyahu, who really seems to be playing president, while increasingly Mr. Trump looks like vice president. Well, I think the Chinese would do everything in their power to support Iran. I don't think they would intervene militarily unless provoked. They have increased the size of the small flotilla of ships that they maintain in the Indian Ocean because they have obviously a very keen interest in the Persian Gulf. We purchase almost nothing coming out of the Persian Gulf now, but they purchase huge quantities of oil and natural gas, so do the Japanese and the Koreans. Access to those resources are very important to China, and the Chinese will do everything in their power to avoid, seeing that Strait of Hormuz blocked. Now, it may be impossible to do so. The Israelis have repeatedly threatened to destroy, or certainly attack and hope to destroy, the oil infrastructure in Iran. I hope not, because that would sort of make all-out war unavoidable between Iran and Israel. And that's a game changer. So I think if Iran is attacked brutally by us, the Russians will weigh in. And of course, we fought them before. We don't talk about it, but we fought Russian pilots in Korea, and we fought Russian pilots in Vietnam. And they're very good pilots. And they have good aircraft. The equivalent of our F-35 is now on the ground in Iran. But more important are the missiles, the long-range and medium-range strike missiles, as well as the air defenses. They are substantial. The Iranians have not wasted their time. There are thousands of Russian technicians on the ground in Iran. I think Iran would be a very tough nut to crack, particularly with Russia standing behind it. Well, keep in mind that any power, a continental power like Russia or China, is most powerful within their neighborhood. In other words, we would have no chance against the Russians in Eastern Europe or Ukraine. Absolutely impossible. Their army is arguably now the best in the world, battle hardened. All the weak leaders have been run out. The corrupt ones have been arrested, jailed, or shot. So I think the Russian military is in a very good position. Now, our Air Force is certainly technologically superior, but that may not make the difference it has historically simply because of integrated air defenses. Integrated air and missile defense is something we've ignored. Oh, yes, we built Patriot, and We built a few other systems, but the idea of integrating something on a regional level, on the large scale with a whole variety of systems that overlap, that can benefit from each other's radar, cross sections, and so forth. That's something we haven't done very well. I see an emphasis now finally beginning to happen, but not in time for us to best the Russians in Europe, and potentially not in time for us to best them in the Middle East.